Dog won't stop barking at an abandoned house. What they found inside broke everyone's hearts. Rex suddenly stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, his ears perked, his body rigid. Sarah tugged on his leash gently. "Come on, Rex, we're almost done with our walk." But the dog wouldn't move. Instead, he let out a low growl, his gaze fixed on a decaying boarded-up house across the street. "Rex, stop it. Let's go." Her voice was firm, but she could feel the tension in his posture. He pulled hard toward the house, barking sharply. Sarah sighed, glancing at her watch. She was exhausted from a long day at the hospital and wasn't in the mood for distractions. Yet, something in Rex's relentless behavior unsettled her. "Fine," she muttered, crossing the street. Rex strained against the leash, barking louder now. They reached the cracked driveway and Rex began scratching at the rotting front door. "What is with you?" Sarah knelt to examine him, but before she could think further, a faint sound drifted from inside the house. She froze. It was faint, a soft, muffled whimper. Her chest tightened. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the silence. No response. She gripped Rex's leash tightly, her heart pounding as she debated what to do. The whimpering came again, slightly louder this time. Rex barked furiously, scratching harder at the door, his claws scraping against the wood. Sarah swallowed hard. There was no way she could ignore it now. She scanned the area, her fingers trembling as she pulled her phone out to turn on the flashlight. She pushed on the door and it creaked open with a shudder. Rex bolted inside before she could stop him, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. "Rex, wait," she hissed, stepping into the dark, stale air of the house. The sound of her breathing echoed in the eerie stillness as she followed the dog deeper inside. And then she heard it, clear and heart-wrenching. A child's sob. Her pulse spiked. "Is someone there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The sobbing stopped, replaced by silence so heavy it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Rex dashed into a room at the end of the hall, barking insistently. Sarah's instincts kicked in. She had to find out what was happening. Sarah stepped cautiously into the room at the end of the hall, her flashlight cutting through the dim, stale air. Rex stood rigid in the center of the room, barking toward a low bed covered in a layer of dust and cobwebs. Sarah's pulse quickened as she heard another faint whimper from beneath the bed. "Rex, quiet," she commanded softly, but her voice was shaky. She crouched down and pointed the flashlight into the shadows under the bed. What she saw made her breath hitch. Two small faces stared back at her, wide-eyed and trembling. A boy and a girl no older than 6 or 7, huddled close together. Their clothes were dirty and torn, their cheeks hollow from hunger. Between them was a frail, shivering cat, its fur matted and thin. The girl clutched the cat tightly, her lips quivering as tears streamed silently down her face. "It's okay," Sarah said, keeping her voice calm and low. "I'm here to help." She set the flashlight down and held up her hands, trying not to scare them. "Are you hurt? Are you alone?" The boy didn't answer. He only shook his head and clung tighter to the girl, who buried her face in his shoulder. The cat let out a weak meow, breaking the tense silence. Sarah's medical instincts kicked in. "You're safe now," she assured them, her tone gentle but firm. She motioned for Rex to sit, and the dog obeyed, lying down quietly beside her. "This is Rex. He's a good boy. He's the reason I found you." The girl peeked over her brother's shoulder, her small hand reaching out hesitantly toward Rex. Sarah watched as the dog leaned forward, gently licking her fingers. The girl's face softened just a little. "Can you tell me your names?" Sarah asked. Her voice carried a calm authority, the same tone she used to comfort patients in emergencies. "Liam," the boy mumbled finally. "And she's Ellie." "Liam, Ellie, I need to call someone to help us, okay? But I promise I won't leave you." She grabbed her phone, dialing 911 with steady fingers. Rex stayed by the children, his steady presence keeping them calm as Sarah prepared to get them the help they desperately needed. Sarah stayed on the line with the emergency operator, explaining the situation in a hushed voice while keeping her eyes on the children. 2 minors, malnourished, possibly abandoned. "We're in an abandoned house on East Hollow Street. Send help quickly." Ellie flinched at the sound of Sarah's voice. The girl's grip on the cat tightened as if it were her only lifeline. Liam moved slightly forward, positioning himself protectively in front of his sister, his thin frame trembling but defiant. Sarah ended the call and slid the phone back into her pocket. She knelt closer to their eye level, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Help is on the way," she said softly. "I promise you're going to be okay." Liam's lips tightened, his trust clearly fragile. "You're not going to take us away, right? We have to stay here. Mom told us to wait." Sarah's heart sank. She knew better than to force too much information out of traumatized children, but his words raised a dozen questions. "Where's your mom?" she asked gently. "When was the last time you saw her?" Liam hesitated, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "She left days ago. She said she'd be back soon." But he stopped, glancing at Ellie, whose small sobs returned, muffled against her brother's shoulder. "But she didn't come back." Sarah bit her lip, fighting the surge of emotion rising in her chest. "I'm sure she tried," she said carefully. "And we're going to find her. But right now, I need to make sure you're safe." Rex, as if sensing their unease, crawled closer on his belly, his warm, steady gaze fixed on the children. Ellie let out a soft gasp when Rex gently rested his head near her feet. Slowly, she reached out and placed a trembling hand on his fur. "He's soft," she whispered, her voice breaking the tension in the room. "He's your friend now," Sarah said with a small smile, watching as Rex's calm presence worked its magic. "And so am I." Ellie nodded, still stroking the dog's fur, while Liam watched, his defenses slowly lowering. For the first time since entering the house, Sarah felt hope. But she knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge was making sure these children were truly safe, and finding out what had happened to their mother. The faint sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, a reassurance that help was on its way. Yet, in the dimly lit room, the weight of uncertainty still pressed down heavily. Sarah sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, keeping her movements slow and deliberate to avoid startling the children. Rex remained by Ellie's side, his presence a silent source of comfort. Ellie whispered something into Liam's ear, and he nodded, his thin arms wrapping protectively around her shoulders. Sarah noticed the way they clung to each other, their bond unshakable despite their clear exhaustion and fear. "Do you know how long your mom's been gone?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but firm. She didn't want to push them too hard, but she needed answers. Liam hesitated, his small hands gripping Ellie's shoulders tightly. I don't know." She said she'd be quick, he mumbled, his voice cracking. "But it's been dark, a lot. I don't know how many times." Ellie whimpered at his words, burying her face into the cat's frail body. The animal let out a weak purr as if trying to comfort her. Sarah's throat tightened. Days without food, water, or any sense of security, these children had been through more than most adults could endure. "It's okay," Sarah assured him. "You've been so brave, both of you. And your mom would be proud of how strong you've been." Liam looked at her then, his eyes filled with tears he was trying hard not to shed. "She promised she'd come back," he whispered. What if something bad happened?" Sarah's heart clenched. She wanted to promise him everything would be fine, but she couldn't lie. Instead, she placed a hand on the floor, close enough to show she was there without invading his space. "That's what we're going to find out," she said softly. "And until then you have me and Rex. You're not alone anymore." The sirens grew louder and blue and red lights flickered through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Ellie looked up, her face streaked with tears but now tinged with a hint of curiosity. "See?" Sarah said gently. "Help is here." Rex stood, his ears perked and his tail wagging slightly. As the first footsteps approached the house, Sarah knew this moment marked a turning point. But she also understood that the journey for these children, and their mother, was far from over. The front door creaked open as two police officers and a paramedic stepped cautiously into the house. Their flashlights illuminated the broken furniture and the children huddled on the floor. Rex barked once, not aggressively but enough to make his presence known. He remained close to Ellie, his protective instincts unwavering. "Ma'am, are you the one who called?" one of the officers asked, his eyes scanning the room and landing on the children. "Yes," Sarah said, standing quickly. "These two have been here for days. They're malnourished and scared. Their mother hasn't come back." The paramedic knelt by the children, speaking gently as he opened his kit. "Hi there. My name's Jake. I'm here to help you, okay?" Liam tensed, pulling Ellie closer, his eyes darting between Jake and Sarah. "They're terrified," Sarah explained, stepping closer. "I promised them I wouldn't leave." Jake nodded. "That's fine. You can stay with them for now." He turned to Liam and spoke softly. "Can I check your sister? Just to make sure she's okay?" Liam hesitated, his gaze flicking to Sarah. She gave him a reassuring nod. "It's okay, Liam. He just wants to help." Slowly, Liam loosened his grip, allowing Jake to gently examine Ellie. The girl clung to her cat, her wide eyes never leaving Rex. Jake worked quickly, checking her vitals and offering her a small bottle of water, which she accepted with trembling hands. The officer, meanwhile, pulled Sarah aside. Do you know anything about the mother? Where she might be? All I know is what Liam told me, Sarah said, lowering her voice. She left to get help and never came back. He said it's been days. The officer frowned. We'll need to follow up and locate her. The kids will need to go with child services until we sort this out. Sarah's stomach twisted. She looked back at the children, now holding hands as Jake checked Liam. The idea of separating them from each other, or from Rex, felt unbearable. Do they have to go right now? They've been through so much already. The officer hesitated, then sighed. We'll do what we can to make it smooth for them. But we need to ensure they're safe. Ellie whimpered as Jake finished, leaning into Liam for comfort. Rex moved closer, resting his head on her lap. She looked up at Sarah with tearful eyes. You're not going to leave us, are you? Sarah knelt beside her, her throat tight. Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Not if I can help it. As the paramedics prepared to transport the children to the hospital for evaluation, Sarah lingered by their side, feeling a gnawing tension in her chest. Rex stayed close to Ellie, his tail wagging faintly as he pressed his warm body against her for comfort. Liam, though still guarded, seemed to draw strength from Rex's unwavering presence. Miss, one of the officers said, approaching Sarah quietly. We've been digging into this situation. We found a few things that might help piece this together. He handed her a small, crumpled photograph they'd found tucked in a corner of the house. It showed a woman, smiling faintly, holding Ellie as a baby. Liam stood beside her, his hand clutching the hem of her shirt. The photograph's edges were worn, but Sarah recognized the same hollow cheeks and resilient eyes she'd seen in the children. Is this their mom? Sarah asked, her voice low. The officer nodded. We've identified her as Maria Thompson. She's listed as the sole guardian of the children. Here's the thing. She was admitted to the hospital 3 days ago after a severe car accident. She's alive but unconscious, in critical condition. Sarah's chest tightened. She's been in the hospital this whole time? Yes. She had no ID on her when she was found, so there's been no way to notify anyone. It explains why the children were left here alone. The weight of the revelation hit Sarah hard. She glanced back at Liam and Ellie, now sitting on the floor with Rex between them. They had waited for their mother, holding on to hope even as days turned into a nightmare. Do they know? Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. Not yet, the officer replied. That's where things get tricky. We don't know when, or if she'll recover. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. They've already been through so much. If there's a chance their mother can recover, they need to know she hasn't abandoned them. She knelt beside the children, her heart pounding. Liam, Ellie, I just talked to the officers. They found your mom. She's been in the hospital because she got hurt, but she's alive. Liam's eyes widened, a mixture of relief and fear flashing across his face. She's okay? Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. She's fighting to get better. She's very strong just like you two. And the doctors are doing everything they can to help her. Ellie clung to Rex, tears streaming down her cheeks. Can we see her? She whispered. Sarah reached out, her hand resting lightly on Ellie's. Not yet, sweetheart. But I'll make sure you get to see her as soon as you can. For the first time that night, Ellie leaned forward and wrapped her small arms around Sarah. The warmth of the hug, combined with the sound of Rex's gentle breathing, filled the room with a fragile sense of hope. The children were placed in the ambulance, their fragile frames bundled in blankets. Rex jumped in after them, settling protectively between Liam and Ellie, his calm presence bringing them a sense of safety. Sarah stood outside, speaking with the officer before climbing into the back with them. We'll take them to the hospital first, the officer said. But once they're stable, child services will step in. Sarah's stomach churned. They need stability. They need to know they're not alone. Can't exceptions be made? The officer sighed. It's complicated. The mother's condition will determine the next steps, but until she wakes up, they'll likely stay in temporary care. Sarah clenched her fists. They've been through enough. Inside the ambulance, Ellie leaned against Rex's fur, her fingers tangled in his coat. Liam sat stiffly, his face set in a way that seemed too old for his years. Sarah climbed in, her presence immediately softening their tense postures. Rex and I are coming with you, she said, offering a small smile. We're not going anywhere. Ellie nodded, her tired eyes closing as she rested her head against Rex. Liam glanced at her. You promise? Sarah met his gaze. I promise. At the hospital, doctors and nurses moved swiftly to examine the children. Ellie whimpered as a nurse tried to check her temperature, but Rex nudged her hand with his nose, and she relaxed enough for the nurse to continue. Liam stayed quiet, watching everything with wary eyes. Sarah took the lead, answering questions about what she knew of their situation. As she spoke, a nurse approached with an update. The mother, Maria Thompson, is stable but still unconscious. The head trauma was severe, but there's a chance she might recover. It'll take time. Sarah felt a flicker of relief but also an ache for the children who were stuck in limbo. She turned to the nurse. Can they stay near her? Even if she's not awake, they need to feel close to her. The nurse hesitated. We'll have to get clearance. But I'll do my best. Hours passed and Liam and Ellie remained close to Rex, who had become their anchor in the storm. Finally, the nurse returned with news. They can visit her room briefly. One at a time. Sarah looked at Liam and Ellie. Do you want to see her? Liam nodded, his hand trembling as he gripped Ellie's. We need to see her. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing this small step would mean everything to them. Together, they walked toward the room where Maria lay, holding on to hope that this visit could begin to heal what had been broken. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Maria lay motionless on the bed, her face pale and framed by the stark white sheets. Tubes and machines surrounded her fragile body, a stark contrast to the warmth Sarah had imagined for the children's reunion. She glanced at Liam and Ellie, whose wide, apprehensive eyes reflected both fear and longing. You can go in, Sarah said softly, kneeling to their level. She's still sleeping, but she'll feel you're here. Liam swallowed hard, his small hand tightening around Ellie's. Can we both go? Sarah nodded, her voice calm despite the lump in her throat. Just for a moment. Rex will wait right here. Rex let out a quiet bark, as if acknowledging his role as their guardian. Ellie hesitated, glancing at him before taking a shaky step forward. Liam followed closely, his face set with determination. Sarah stayed back, letting them have the moment. The siblings approached the bed cautiously. Liam's gaze remained fixed on his mother's face, searching for signs of movement. Ellie, still clutching her cat, climbed onto a chair beside the bed. Mommy, she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was no response, but Ellie leaned closer, resting her tiny hand on Maria's arm. We waited, Mommy, she said, her voice trembling. We did what you told us. Liam stood rigid at the foot of the bed, his fists clenched. Why didn't you come back? He muttered, his voice breaking. We needed you. Sarah stepped into the room, her heart aching at the rawness of his words. She didn't want to leave you, she said gently. She got hurt trying to come back. But she's still fighting, just like you two have been. Liam's shoulders sagged, the weight of the past days finally catching up to him. He moved closer to the bed and placed his hand over his sister's, both of them holding onto their mother. Ellie's tears fell freely now, dripping onto the blanket as she murmured, We love you, Mommy. Sarah blinked back her own tears as she watched the silent exchange. Even in her unconscious state, Maria's presence was a lifeline for her children. Rex, sitting just outside the door, let out a soft whine, his head resting on his paws. After a few moments, Sarah stepped forward. It's time to let her rest, she said softly. But we'll come back. As many times as you want. Ellie reluctantly slid off the chair, her cat tucked in her arms. Liam lingered for a moment longer, his hand brushing against his mother's before he turned to join Sarah. She'll wake up, right? He asked quietly. We'll hope for that, Sarah said, her voice steady but tender. And until then she'll feel your love. As they left the room, Rex stood to greet them, his tail wagging gently. Liam knelt beside him, burying his face in the dog's fur. Ellie followed, sitting quietly beside them. For the first time, the weight of uncertainty seemed lighter, carried by the connection they shared with each other, and with the loyal dog who had brought them this far. Weeks had passed since that first visit to the hospital. Maria remained unconscious, but her condition had stabilized. Liam and Ellie were staying in temporary foster care nearby, but Sarah visited them every day, bringing Rex along to maintain the bond that had become their anchor. Each day they visited Maria, sitting quietly by her bed and sharing stories about Rex, their mother, and their hopes for her recovery. It was a sunny afternoon when Sarah received the call. She was at the park with the children and Rex, watching them laugh for the first time in weeks as they threw a ball for the dog. The voice on the other end was the nurse, her tone warm but urgent. She's awake. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. She's awake? Yes. It's early and she's weak, but she's asking for her children. Sarah turned to Liam and Ellie, her face breaking into a smile. Your mom woke up, she said, her voice trembling. She wants to see you? Liam's eyes widened in disbelief, and Ellie dropped the ball she had been holding. Really? She asked, her voice a mix of hope and fear. Really? Sarah said, kneeling down. Let's go see her. At the hospital, the children practically ran to Maria's room, with Rex trotting loyally behind them. Sarah followed, her chest tight with anticipation. When they entered, Maria was sitting up slightly, her eyes filled with tears as she saw her children. Liam? Ellie? Her voice was raspy, but her love was unmistakable. Mommy? Ellie cried, rushing to her bedside. She climbed onto the bed and wrapped her small arms around her mother. Liam followed, his movements slower but no less emotional. He leaned into her embrace, his face buried in her shoulder. Maria sobbed softly, holding them as tightly as her frail body would allow. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to leave you. We knew you'd come back, Liam said, his voice muffled. We waited just like you told us. Sarah stood at the door with Rex, her eyes misty as she watched the reunion. Maria looked up at her, gratitude written all over her face. You brought them back to me, she said softly. Thank you. Sarah stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. It wasn't just me, she said, glancing at Rex. He wouldn't let me ignore them. He knew they needed help. Maria smiled weakly, reaching out to pet Rex. Thank you, boy, she said, her voice full of warmth. Rex wagged his tail and licked her hand as if to say it was all in a day's work. Over the next hour, the room filled with laughter and tears as Maria listened to the children recount their days with Sarah and Rex. The bond they had formed during her absence was evident, and Maria expressed her gratitude repeatedly. As the sun began to set outside the window, Sarah stood to leave. We'll give you some time as a family, she said, looking at Liam and Ellie. But remember, Rex and I are just a call away. Ellie ran to her, wrapping her arms around Sarah's waist. You're part of our family now too, she said, her voice soft but certain. Sarah hugged her tightly, feeling the truth of those words settle in her heart. Always, she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. As she walked out with Rex, she glanced back one last time to see the children snuggled up beside their mother, their faces glowing with happiness. Rex nudged her hand with his nose, and she smiled, knowing that, together, they had helped rebuild something that had been so close to breaking. This wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a new life for all of them. This story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, hope can find its way to us, sometimes through the courage of a loyal companion, the kindness of a stranger, or the unwavering bond of family. Rex's instincts, Sarah's determination, and the resilience of Liam and Ellie prove that love and compassion can rebuild what feels broken. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder of the strength we find in connection and courage. Don't forget to like this video and leave your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? And if you want more stories that inspire and move you, subscribe to our channel. Together, let's keep spreading hope and humanity one story at a time.